I could call this meeting to order. Welcome to the August 21st edition of Charlotte Rotary, and an interesting edition it is. We'll give you a little bit of background about what our lives have been like this morning in a little bit, but prior to that, we're going to get Mark Turner to come up and give us our invocation.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for giving me the opportunity today. Many of you know I serve as a Scout executive for the Scout organization, and the 12th point of the Scout law is reverent. And in the Scout handbook, it reads, "A Scout is reverent towards God. Always be faithful in your religious duties and respect the beliefs of others. Wonders all around us remind us of our faith in God. We find it in the tiny secrets of creation and in the great mysteries of the universe. It exists in the kindness of people and in the teachings of our family and religious leaders. We show our reverence by living our lives according to the ideals of our beliefs. We will encounter people expressing their reverence in many different ways. It is our duty to respect and defend the rights of their religious beliefs when they differ from our own." And that's powerful teaching for all of our young people today. Will you pray with me? Lord, we're thankful for our goodness, for all the goodness you provide for us. Knowing that you are the Creator, I thank you for our blessings, and I humbly ask that you open our hearts to receive and acknowledge those blessings. Sometimes we take things for granted, but I know it is only through grace we are saved. Give us the courage to share with others your sacrifice. I humbly ask for blessings on my family, and my friends, and my city, and my country. Amen.
Thank you, Mark. And now the incomparable Herb Harris to introduce our visitors and guests. Is that a good enough lead-in for you, Herb? Thank you.
It is my privilege and pleasure to introduce our guests and visiting Rotarians today. Clearly, I'm on the first team because you can see that I have this very normal, pre-printed version of our, I'm not sure what happened to the real one, but I have this. When I call your names, will you please stand and remain standing until all have been introduced? And I'm going to begin with our guests. First, Howard Layson, who's a guest of the club. Please stand. There you are. Thank you. Well, that may be too, possibly. I think we probably
we're going to have to get the hook out soon.
Okay. For me? Next, William Turner, guest of David Anderson. Marjorie Wren, guest of Michael Wellinger. My glasses here. Bear Shawn, guest of Mike Hawley. She's from a little ways off. And Lee Bullard, who is a guest of Byron Bullard, and I presume probably related to him. Maybe even daughter or something. Now for our visiting Rotarians. Wafa Fathi from Casablanca. Kees Slingerland from Netherlands. And now for the one who comes from the most remote area, Michael Barnes, Mount Airy Rotary. There's Michael. It's certainly remote. If you will now give everyone a warm Rotary welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Herb, and you might as well stay standing along with everybody else for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please be seated. So this was one interesting morning. I rise early. I had my earphones in so I didn't disturb my wife, but I listened to the BBC, at about 4:30 in the morning, and it transitions over to WFAE at 5. And the first news story on FAE at 5 o'clock was a disturbance at Chapel Hill. And I'm quickly kicking into my brain, Carol Folt is coming here today. And, so it was quite interesting. So the email traffic was heavy from about 6 o'clock this morning until about 10 when we got the word from Carol's office that she was going to stay in Chapel Hill, which is the right thing for her to do. And so we apologize for not having Carol here today, but we're going to get her back. We'll get it rescheduled, and it was a great testament, really, to the program committee chaired by Mac and Benton and all of the members of the program committee to basically come together to put a program up for you today that I think you're going to be proud to have. Actually, just a little background, and Mac is going to introduce our program, but Mac quickly sent an email around this morning saying, I think we need Plan B. Let's start thinking about it. And I had sent him back a note that said, you know, Mac, this is where the president and the co-chairs of the program committee just have to step up. And I said, one of the possibilities is that the three of us are going to have to do how I got where I'm at. And yeah, he was, I couldn't see him shaking his head, but I knew he was shaking it. But you're in for a much better treat than that. I did think about this a little bit, though. You know, our club has members who have been here for a very long time, and while we have How I Got Where I'm At, primarily for the new members, you know, every now and then I think we need to sprinkle in some of the old timers, because frankly, I mean, I've totally forgotten what the background on Mac is, for instance. I would love to hear that again sometime. Anyway, I digress. Actually, and we're under a whole lot less pressure today, other than, you know, getting our special guest speaker up here, which we don't want to delay on. But we're going to start with Tom Bartholomew and a Better Business Bureau moment. We were trying to hide it.
Thanks, Matt. You don't put baby in a corner. And I appreciated President Mike's emails this morning, because it first went, okay, Dr. Folt's going to be here, so you got to keep it really tight. And now all of a sudden, hey, take as much time as you like. So,
Three minutes, Tom.
okay. So I looked back in my archives, and the very first scam I ever told the club about was the IRS scam. It's like 5 years ago. And unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that it has now morphed into probably 20 or 30 different things. But the most recent one that we just started receiving calls and input on our scam tracker last week, where they're now calling folks and telling them that your son, your daughter that you're ready to send off to school, you haven't paid the new student tax that was in the new new tax code. You haven't paid the student tax. Unless you pay that immediately, your student isn't going to be allowed into school. And apparently they had done a pretty good job of data mining Facebook to find people that had school-aged children and targeted those individuals. And sorry to say that there are people that are paying the student tax, and they're going down. And now, in case you didn't know, the IRS takes iTunes cards as a payment method. I thought that would have been a pretty good tell for folks that this may not be the IRS, but they're able to spoof. The caller ID comes up saying Internal Revenue Service, and they act very official when they call. They're taking people for between $500 and $1,200. So spread the word. This one's going to go away in about a week when everybody's back at school, and they know that their kids are able to get in without paying that student tax. But until then, if you get a call like this, or let any of your friends and neighbors know that there is no such thing as a student tax, and no, the IRS is not calling you to collect money with an iTunes card. So there you go.
Thank you, Tom. So as many of you are aware, we've got a technology initiative underway. Our great videographers back here. Give them a big round of applause. Thank you, guys. We had, I think, you know, Kim got the word out to most of the media outlets. Somebody from Channel 3 has been wandering around out in the halls, and I know a lot of people thought they were coming to video you. No. They just didn't get the word that Carol Folk was not going to be here today. So in any event, the technology stuff is really pretty incredible. We've put links in a number of publications so that you can quickly see what it is that's being recorded up here and how effective it is. We're going to talk to you a little bit about that when we are finished with the pilot of this, which is another month or so off. But in the meantime, one of the three prongs of this initiative is to see if we can't get a little bit more involvement of our members in the promotion of the club. And so I'm going to bring Kim up to tell you a little bit about that element of it. And actually, we were just going to have two videos, cameos here, but since we have the luxury of time, 4 today. Kim.
So we were thinking the best way to get the word out about Charlotte Rotary is through the mouths of the Rotarians. In my business, if we want to sell soap, we use a testimonial from someone who loves the soap, right? So today, we're going to show you 4 testimonials, and this is just the beginning. We're going to be doing this again in September. We would like to, and we'll give you some notice, but we want to get everybody on camera talking about what they love about Charlotte Rotary.
I have remained in Rotary for a period of time for 3 big reasons. One, the motto, service above self. That resonates with me. It resonates with the way that I was raised and remaining active and engaged in our community. And the second reason is the information that we get in Rotary, the meetings, the speakers that tell us about what's going on in our local businesses, nonprofits, and government. I feel like that helps me to be a good and informed active member of my community because I have the information that I need to make good choices and to learn how to serve above self. And finally, the 4-way test of what we think, say, or do is important to me because I feel like it means that the members of our club have a common moral compass, and that's important.
It gives you an opportunity to meet with a lot of the makers and shakers of the city. You have excellent presentations every week. You develop a great comradeship with all of these people, and it's a great opportunity to give back to your community.
Charlotte Rotary gives me an opportunity to serve my local community and the world in equal measure, while at the same time connecting with my peers in fellowship and networking on a weekly basis, and it really is a very fulfilling and fun opportunity.
Join Charlotte Rotary for the community. I've been in the club 18 years, believe it or not. I know I look like I'm 35, but over the years, it's become more and more apparent to me that I know a lot of people here. And every year that I come to Rotary, I know more and more people. It's a big club. We have almost 300 members. So there is some turnover, but you realize there's a core of people here who become very, very important to you over time. So that's what I value about Charlotte Rotary.
There we go. Let's give them a big round of applause. And, I think we'll talk about this more later, but there's some real power in these kinds of videos, and there's a lot of things we can do with them besides just testimonials. There's a lot of history about our club that we have to repeat year after year, what types of student programs we have, what is involved with those, and rather than trying to do it from scratch every time, we're probably going to video a number of people who have history with these programs, and will make it a whole lot easier to just convey that information to us. So thank you, Kim, and your crew. They're fantastic. The Board of Directors is meeting right after this session appropriately in the think tank, wherever that is, but it's somewhere down the hall. So the Board of Directors immediately after in the think tank. Introducing our head table of prominent Rotarians. You've heard from Kim Brattain, heard from Mark Turner. You've not heard from Ben Dobson, but come up and visit with him afterwards. And to introduce our special guest and speaker, we've got Mac McCarley.
Thank you, President Mike. One person clapping, that's about right. Thank you. Our speaker today is not Chancellor Folt. When the Vice Chancellor called me this morning about 10 o'clock, he said, we'd love to be there. It would actually be a pretty good venue for her to be able to say some things that she'd rather not say in Chapel Hill where people can hit her with rocks. But he said that there were about 1,000 people on each side of the issue who needed to personally tell her today what her next step ought to be. He did promise that they would try and reschedule her for our club sometime this program year. So our speaker today is not Carol Folt. Our speaker today is one of my former bosses, David Erdman. In 1999, when Al Rousseau resigned from the council fairly abruptly, the council appointed David to fill his slot. David was an excellent boss, almost as detail-oriented as John Tabor, but not quite. David is one of the most recognized and renowned local historians in Charlotte. He has given at this point over 225 presentations on Charlotte geography, history, and culture. He is sought after by the media whenever there's a historical event or something that, an architectural issue that they want some perspective on. David is the person they call. He is Mr. History for Charlotte. And he has agreed to step in today to fill a program slot. So, two things. First, help me welcome David, and second, help me thank David for pulling our bacon out of the fire today.
Well, it is a privilege to be here. I remember when Mike Allman spoke almost 20 years ago here, he said that this is Charlotte's leading forum, and I truly believe that. And I will always treasure my nameplate from today's meeting. On the back it says Carol Folt. I also remember Tim Newman saying one day when he had to preside for some reason over the club, and he said he was a stand-in, and so I'm a speaker stand-in. What I'm going to do is show you pictures of old Charlotte. But before I do that, I want to, by the way, if we happen to dim the lights a little bit so that the slides would be better, suit me just fine. I was in Oklahoma City a month ago, and they had opened a 100-year time capsule in the year 2013. And in the time capsule was a commemoration of the Rotary Club of Oklahoma City in 1913. That's embroidered names into a quilt. So I just thought that was so interesting, I had to show it to you. Now we're going to find out how this works. Also, I'm always collecting information about Old Charlotte. So about 1937, the Charlotte News received this congratulation from our Charlotte Rotary Club. And I want to thank you for the privilege of speaking here today. Before I say anything else, I want to thank President Mike Hawley, Mac McCarley, Sandy Osborne, Ron Kimball, David Tobin, Jessica Dupree, Benton Bragg, Kim Brattain, and Tom Bartholomew, because every one of them had to spring into action to make anything happen at our meeting today. So what I'm going to do today is talk about 50 lost architectural treasures of old Charlotte. And in honor of our president, Mike Hawley, I'm going to start. My first slide is the Hawley Mansion. The Hawley Mansion was built in 1906 and stood on Elizabeth Avenue. It later was known as Mrs. Moorhead's boarding house. Mike and I have not discussed whether it's kin or not.
I'm not sure. If they're not in jail, they're kin.
All right. I'm going to show pictures of 50 buildings, and one of them is still standing, albeit not where it was originally located. This is our Mint when it was located on West Trade Street in Charlotte, and most of you know that it was taken apart block by block and moved around 1931 in order to avoid being simply demolished. And then it was reconstructed as part of WPA in around 1936 and 37. All right. Every picture I'm going to show you is an actual photograph. And I use this slide to illustrate why I use photographs. These are all colorized postcards. Colorized postcards are easier on the eyes, without a doubt, because they are color. But nobody knows what these buildings, the color of these buildings really was, at least when they were making the postcards. And so I've chosen to focus on actual photographs. That's with one exception down to the left. Those other 5 buildings are all the same building, the Independence Building. So, start with Central Hotel, right at the square. one of the oldest buildings in Charlotte. By the way, no one alive today was alive when the Central Hotel was standing. But I wanted you to see what you'll learn in seeing these pictures is that Charlotte was a real city 100 years ago. Now, it was a small city. We only had, well, 100 years ago, we were up to 25,000 people, roughly. But Charlotte is 250 years old this year, this very year. We're celebrating that 250th anniversary. And so I'm going to show you buildings from our history. The D.H. Hill Military School. This became Charlotte's first public school, located over on Moorhead Street, actually facing South Boulevard at Moorhead. The Buford Hotel and Bank. There are people in this room who remember that building because it wasn't torn down until around 1960. And the bank became, it was Union National Bank and became First Union National Bank. And of course, they built their other buildings here in our city in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, maybe even 80s. But the bank was on the first floor, and the hotel was upstairs. Second Presbyterian Church. There's bound to be somebody in this room who actually went to Second Presbyterian Church. This is the church. There's some hands being held up. This is the church that, along with another church, merged and was relocated to Dilworth to become Covenant Presbyterian Church. This building was on North Tryon Street. You know, as we look at these pictures, I hope you'll take into account what monumental structures some of these buildings were. This is a remarkable building, in my opinion. Well, City Hall, 1888. It also doubled as the fire station, which is why you can see where the horses would come out of the horse gate there. But that was our City Hall. But it didn't have to be for long, because in 1898, the city built this monumental City Hall. And I've always thought that City Hall bespoke ambition, because it was built before the turn of the century. Charlotte had a population of about 18,000 people, and yet it built such a monumental City Hall, reminiscent in my eyes of the one in Philadelphia, where William Penn's statue is on top. And the Federal Enclave. The building on the right is actually the Mint in its old location. And the building on the left is the post office and federal courthouse. It only stood until 1915, so you see the age of this picture. But that also beautiful building was torn down to build half of our current federal courthouse, and the Mint was moved to move the other half, to build the other half of our current federal courthouse. So it's always been a federal enclave, meaning federal property within the city of Charlotte. The Manufacturers Club. Anybody here remember the Manufacturers Club? You would have been a child if you remember. Ralston Pound remembers it. The Manufacturers Club on West Trade Street was sort of the city club of its day, only the manufacturers, of whom there were so many in this town of cotton mills, the manufacturers would hang out there. Presbyterian College for Women had a beautiful building on North Church Street. North College Street. That's why it's named North College Street. That is now Queen's University of Charlotte. They moved out of that building about 100 years ago to the campus that's in Myers Park. It became Queen's College. But it was originally Presbyterian College for Women. And this building lasted until, I think, the 1950s. But again, what a monumental structure right uptown. The Dilworth Park Pavilion and Theater. I wish I knew more about this place. I don't know what they did in the pavilion. Probably roller skating, probably dances, probably entertainment. We would imagine a theater had theatrical productions. But it was built out at the Latta Park area in Dilworth to attract people to move to Dilworth. So that was the Dilworth Park Pavilion and Theater. And the whole idea, we all know that Dilworth was Charlotte's first suburb. We were a tightly packed city until the trolley was routed out South Boulevard and then East Boulevard, opening up the whole neighborhood of Dilworth. The Mecklenburg County Courthouse, 1896. I look at that building, and again, I see ambition. This is that small town building a monumental courthouse. And I believe that its vague resemblance to the United States Capitol was a signal that the South, this city anyway in the South, was back in the Union, had rejoined the United States. Now, it's 31 years after the war was over, but there were lots of people around who didn't think the war was over. And this was quite a statement. Elizabeth College. I think most of you know that Elizabeth College was a campus on Elizabeth Avenue where Presbyterian Hospital, Presbyterian Novant Hospital as they now call it, is located. And that college went out of business around 1909, but it had some buildings and they became ultimately Presbyterian Hospital. The D.A. Tompkins building on South Church Street. Tompkins owned the newspaper, and he was, I like to say, and I hope Hugh McCall would regard this as a compliment, but I would recall him the Hugh McCall of his day. He is a person who did more to build this city with a building like this, with the newspaper, with commerce, but mostly by supporting the textile manufacturing industry. And the textile manufacturing industry became a large part of what built Charlotte into a big city. The Catawba Power Company. Who knows whether this building would have been preserved if it hadn't burned. It burned in 1923. But this is where James B. Duke had his offices, because you know he moved to Charlotte about 1916 with his world-class fortune, which he had gotten from selling 4/5 of the American Tobacco Company, because he had to sell it because the Theodore Roosevelt trustbusters made him disseize himself, dispose of 4/5 of the assets. But he got cash. And so he came and bought more than 100,000 acres of land around the Catawba River, and created the lakes and started generating electric power. His office was there on South Tryon Street. I would like to see a color picture of that, but of course none exist. I imagine that that's kind of a reddish roof and gray stone otherwise. The Carnegie Library. There are people in this room who went to the Carnegie Library. The library was paid for by Andrew Carnegie. History taught us that he paid for libraries all across America. He contributed $25,000, which was a sufficient fund to build that wonderful library in Charlotte. That is still where we have our current library. They used the same site, tore that building down, built the 1955 library, tore that building down, built the roughly 1988 library, which they're talking about tearing down to build another library. The Charlotte Sanatorium. This would be a place to go for some sort of health care. I'm not crystal clear. It was not a tuberculosis sanatorium, I understand that, but they were always way out in the country because tuberculosis was very contagious. This is right at 7th and North Church Street, sort of in the Spirit Square area. The Piedmont Fire Insurance Building on South Tryon Street. This was one of the first real office buildings in Charlotte. Before we had office buildings, we had offices, and offices were little buildings, house-sized buildings, wooden buildings. This is a place where somebody could rent an office in a prestigious address on South Tryon Street in an early date. The Latta Mansion, Edward Dilworth Latta Mansion. What a remarkable house that was on East Boulevard. It was torn down to build the educational building of the Greek church on East Boulevard. But that big house was the anchor of the neighborhood he named after his family name, Dilworth. The Selwyn Hotel. Now, there got to be loads of hands for Selwyn Hotel. People who had their Sunday lunches there. The Selwyn Hotel went up in 1905, 1906, and went down early 1970, 71, 72, and it was the showplace of its time. I like to think that the bay windows were a tip of the hat, so to speak, to the San Francisco earthquake, because San Francisco was known for its bay windows, and this was designed a little time after that. just something different. The train station. There's certainly lots of people who rode the train out of there, although this building went down in 1962, so many of you did not. But this building, again, a monument, and a very important monument to our city, because we, the city of Charlotte, were on the main line of the Southern Railway. That's like being on the main trunk of the oil pipeline. It's very, very important. So trains came through Charlotte, 100 a day, and many of them would stop at this train station. Passengers for sure, freight probably. This would have been like our airport in the day. Now obviously our airport was coming along by 1962, but the train station, if you go back another generation, it held the importance that our airport holds today. And this was a fine train station. The Independence Building, we do have a color picture of that building. I took that picture. When I heard that they were going to tear it down, I went and grabbed a camera and grabbed a picture. So we know that it was kind of a gold brick there. The Independence Building, if you'll look at it, you'll see that they added 2 stories on the top of it. In fact, I'm not sure they didn't add 3, but you can see where the building design changes at the top, and that was the vogue in those days, to make sure your building was still the tallest one in town, so you'd add floors. It was done to other buildings as well. The YMCA was not until 0960, it was 1960, so that's a typo. But I know there are a lot of men in here who went to the YMCA on South Tryon Street. It was a very major institution in our city for the first, maybe it still is, but especially in the first half of the last century. The YMCA, if you were anybody male, you wanted to be in the YMCA. The first law building, we had a later law building on Trade Street, and I'll show you that one, but this was on South Tryon Street, and it was next door to that 1896 courthouse that looked like the United States Capitol. The building was torn down, well, I don't know when this one's torn down, probably in the, it's kind of unclear, because Sturkey's furniture store later occupied this building, and then Sturkey's later occupied another building further south. So it's a little unclear to me when this building went down. But I can tell you that they added 2 stories to it, and it was a 5-story building at a later stage. The American Trust Company. This is important Charlotte history. There were 2 banks immediately next door to each other, undoubtedly hyper competitors. One was American Trust Company, and I'll show you the other in a minute. But first, the Belk store. That Belk store was originally only a half wide. The left half was built first in the 1920s, and then they made it a double wide by adding the right-hand side in the later 1920s. By the way, a lesson there. By 1929, almost everything stopped. Almost everything, because of course the Great Depression, there was no money. But Charlotte built a lot up to 1929 and then started building again after World War II. So there was a long hiatus there. But the Belk store was double-wided before the Depression. This is the other bank, Commercial National Bank. There are certainly bankers in this room who know why American Trust and Commercial National are important, because they combined with another bank from Greensboro, as I recall, and became North Carolina National Bank, NCNB. And what NCNB did was tear down both of them and build the building where McCormick and Schmick is now, because that was the first NCNB building here in Charlotte. They used the same land, they just tore down the buildings and had the combined NCNB that became Nations Bank, that became our Bank of America. The Clayton Hotel at West 5th and North Church. Currently a parking lot, I believe, but there there's probably a building there, my mistake. But anyway, the Clayton Hotel. I like this building because it's one of the few places in Charlotte where the land is not flat. And so you can see how the architect adapted to have 2 separate entrances. I'm interested to see how it worked inside. Unless there's somebody here who can tell me, we'll never know. The Coca-Cola Bottling Company of Charlotte. They were there early. Now, I will tell you, that in many of these pictures that were taken 100 years ago, they would put the sign on the picture, and it may well be that that sign was not actually on the building. They would superimpose it. I've seen enough of those to believe that this may have been superimposed, but there's no doubt that that's the Coca-Cola bottling company. Those are trucks with Coca-Cola bottles out front. The Mecklenburg Hotel, it burned about 1978. It was a very important hotel diagonally across the street from the train station. So if you came to Charlotte on the train, you might well spend the night at the Mecklenburg Hotel, and they had a very good restaurant that some of you will remember from your childhood. The YWCA, 1914 to 1969 at that location, that's on East Trade Street. They later put another YWCA building on that location and then moved out to Park Road, as you know. The Alexander Graham Junior High School. Got some hands? Anybody? Yeah, we've got some hands. Alexander Graham Junior High School. Now, there are two Alexander Graham Junior High Schools. We still have one. The one we have is on Runnymede Road. But the original Alexander Graham Junior High School was on East Moorhead Street, and that was the building. And what's historically significant about it, it was the first junior high school in the entire state of North Carolina. It was a whole new concept to have a junior high school. And so that was the first. Of course, it was copied all over the state. And therefore, when they moved locations, they kept the historic name. The Dowd Flats. What a remarkable apartment building. Moorhead and South Boulevard. I'd like to know more about what that looked like inside. It's got towers, kind of a Mediterranean look to it, as you can see. The columns got all sorts of architectural attributes. The professional building. Anybody who grew up in Charlotte 60, 70 years ago went to the doctor at the professional building. That was the doctor's building of its time. That was on North Tryon Street, 7th and North Tryon. The Wade Loft. I expire and gasp when I see that building because I photographed that building. This is not my photograph of it. And 6 months later, it burned. The Wade Loft was like the merchandise mart of Chicago for the city of Charlotte. The merchandising district. This is down on First Street behind in what is now the Arts Complex. But Charlotte was a big breakdown city, and by breakdown, that would mean train loads of cargo would be broken down into truckloads for distribution in the Carolinas. So that was a big breakdown center, and the train lines ran right behind there. The eye, ear, nose, and throat hospital was next door to the professional building. It was where you would have eye, ear, nose, and throat surgery. Very wonderful, sort of advanced in the 1920s that Charlotte had such a facility. Second Ward School. Second Ward School was built 3 years after the Alexander Graham Junior High School that I showed you. To me, the designs are somewhat similar, probably similar enough that the architecture of this building was influenced by the school that was only about 3 blocks away on Moorhead Street. Second Ward School, of course, African American students only, and the buildings and the campus lasted until 1969. The Hotel Charlotte. Those of us who've been in Charlotte long enough remember the day that that building was imploded on national TV. It had been closed since the early 1970s. Something I'm looking for, and all the pictures that I collect are basically for the history of our city. I'm going to give all that I have to the museums, the libraries, universities, when I'm got all that I can get. But what I don't have is pictures of inside that ballroom. And something tells me they're prom pictures or wedding pictures or anniversary events that people have got pictures from inside those Palladian windows, that ballroom. The Walton Hotel, that's where the cotton brokers all stayed, on the cotton side of town, which is over near where the light rail now runs through uptown. Now this one's easy. the Lamplighter Restaurant. See, this one's so much more recent that many of you went to your first date or your Valentine's date or your New Year's Eve dinner at the wonderful Lamplighter Restaurant on East Morehead Street. The Wilder Building. Thank goodness I got this picture. I'll be thanking the person who gave it to me in a little while. The Second Law Building. By the way, I'm going to see if this really works. Yes, my law office was on the 3rd floor right there for a short time in my law practice. It was great to be in that wonderful historic building even then. The Southern Railway offices. If you're going to have the main line of the Southern Railway running through Charlotte, you've got to have some offices. And you've got to have a tank to put water into the locomotives. You see the tank. The Observer News Building. This building was torn down, and the later Observer News Building was built on the same site. And of course, it's now gone, and the 25-story building is going up. And the Power Building. The Power Building, monumental in scale and in style. This was known, even though it was Duke Power Company, it was known as the Power Building. And the Power Building, I don't quite understand why that needed to be torn down. You could build any sort of high-rise within that facade and preserve both. Film Row. Talk about breakdown. Charlotte was the film distribution center for a large region, North Carolina, South Carolina, into Tennessee, into Southern Virginia. So in the days when movies came in big old cases of film, they'd carry them out of Charlotte and truck them all over the region. So we were a film distribution center, and all the major film companies were represented in Charlotte to distribute their films. That was on South Church Street. Going the wrong way. The bus station. Other cities have seen fit to preserve the facades of these streamline-styled bus stations and build high-rises behind them. There's a beautiful example in Washington, D.C. of just that. Crockett Park. I always have to show this because I met my wife here. Some of you remember Charlotte used to have a bachelor's club and a spinster's club. Sounds quaint, sounds peculiar, but it was popular in Charlotte. And yes, I met my wife at a spinster's club mixer, and that's what it's all about. That's what it was for. And finally, the Jesus Saves building. Jesus did not save this building. So, if you want to see the other 50 buildings, you can buy my book. Ralston Pound gave me that nice picture of the building I said I'd comment on, and Ralston's a great source of history for me. Bill Barnhart is really the one who got me started on all this. He gave me his scrapbooks a few years ago and said, use these if you'd like, and I've used them a lot. But I also want to thank Catherine Browning, Bob Freeman, Luther Moore, Chase Saunders, Martin Waters, David Zimmerman, and Frank Martin, whose name I inadvertently omitted, for various help in historic matters, and there may be others of you as well. So I want to say the end, thank you, and on time.
As Max said, you are a treasure, and so thank you very much for sharing that with us. So we promised you 2 weeks in a row of folks from Chapel Hill. We've obviously failed at that, but we are going to produce 2 Davidson programs for you the next 2 weeks. So we've got Bob McKillop coming next Tuesday, one of the preeminent basketball coaches in the country, collegiate. And then Jim Martin, who taught chemistry for many, many years at Davidson, is going to be coming to visit with us the following week. And that is it for this edition. We'll see you next week. We're adjourned.